Labrador.
Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer Lokash from Memorial University's Department of English. Welcome to Sparkles 2022, an imprint, we might say, of the Sparks Literary Festival. It has been hard times for organizers of live events like Sparks. We have been thwarted in our efforts to put on a full festival multiple times in these past 2 years, but we have been quietly fanning the festival embers, and this year my colleagues have planned a series of explosive events in flexible formats that continue the project of celebrating the amazing variety of genres, styles, and subjects created by writers in our very midst, crackling with talent and inspiration. Like other Memorial University events that celebrate the rich and sometimes wild literary landscapes of this province, such as our own Visiting Writers series, our Writer in Residence program, and the Office of Alumni Engagement's book club, winningly called Coastlines, to name a few, Sparks has been sharing great writing with appreciative audiences since my colleague Mary Dalton conceived of the festival a remarkable 12 years ago. We are acutely conscious that the beautiful lands on which Memorial's campus are situated and which so vividly take shape in the foregrounds and backgrounds of the work showcased through Sparks are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. We acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We fully commit through Sparks and our other departmental endeavors to honoring these histories and cultures through the crucial work of sharing and promoting many more Indigenous and racialized voices in the years to come. So, what are these sparkles that we are sending up into the universe? Over the next few months, we will be hosting a panel event on genre fiction, an event called 7-Minute Stories, and a spring or summer poetry slam, hopefully in Bannerman Park. We will promote each of these events through our departmental social media and on our Sparks website, so look out for more information soon. For the opening event in the series, we have partnered with Rogers TV, thank you Rogers, to bring you First Pages, readings and interviews with 4 Memorial alumni who will share with us some of their new and exciting work. I will take this opportunity to thank all of the magnificent writers, outstanding interviewers, and brilliant event hosts who will be involved in the Sparkles series. Your generosity and immense creativity is what keep us going. And last but not least, many thanks to you, our faithful Sparks audience, and to readers and lovers of words everywhere.
I'm Allison Graves, and I'm a professor and student at Memorial. I'm introducing Carmella today as part of the Sparks Writers Festival. She'll be reading from her book, Nowadays and Lonelier. The first summer I moved to St. John's, which was in 2015, Carmella and I worked at a cafe together on Harvey Road, where only 2 people could fit behind the counter. The cafe was built for someone short, and Carmella and I, both being 6 feet, used to laugh at the space, how it wasn't big enough for the both of us. I remember us talking a lot that summer about being from the mainland but feeling best in St. John's. We were both doing our MAs at MUN, and I remember days she didn't work, Carmella would come sit at a table at the corner and read. After work, we would go to Hidden Hill, just behind the cafe, and drink a tall can. I have a picture on my Instagram of Carmella eating a pomegranate on this hill, or maybe it was a melon. I've always loved Carmella's writing, and in past, when we've shared work, I've always felt affected by the short staccato sentences she puts on the page. Sentences like, I had just lost my virginity, as though virginity were a mitten on the bus. Reading her book, Nowadays and Lonelier, published as a collection this year by Arsenal Pulp Press, made me think about my own writing, about my relationship with Carmella, and how we all fit together. So many of the relationships in this book are held together through chaos, through forces that threaten the characters and the relationships they've built. Some images that stick out to me are when a young girl and an older man she meets driving across the country smack and kill mosquitoes with books on the wall of his beautiful mid-century modern apartment. Another is when Jasmine and the older painter she lives with have to smother a fire in her apartment with blankets. Carmella captures so well the nuances of relationships, the subtle power plays that exist in our encounters with the people who know us best. In The Call, the protagonist says, "A few times a week, I would stay over at Dylan's house. He was my boyfriend, and in the morning, he'd make us porridge for breakfast. He'd always give me a teaspoon to eat with, and I'd always switch it out for a bigger one because I could eat faster. One day, he told me that he gave me the small spoon so I would eat less. I was the skinniest I'd ever been when we were dating." This, and possibly also this quote coming up, is my favorite quote from the book and is a rumination on time in the story Float. And maybe it's just because I got a new credit card, but this image felt so right to me when I was reading it. Carmella says, "You know when you get a new credit card and you check the expiry date and you think, wow, that is so far in the future. And then suddenly you're getting notifications that your credit card is about to expire and you have to update your payment info everywhere. That is the feeling I've had since returning home. That is the feeling I have on this birthday. The feeling of that life is accelerating, that as my body moves through time, each passing moment amounts to a smaller and smaller fraction of a whole, which is my life." The tiny cafe where Carmella and I became friends is closed now, and when I think back on those times, they feel very near and far at the same time. I feel very lucky to be holding Carmella's book and exist in a community of writers in St. John's that she's a part of.
Thank you. That was so nice. I'm going to read the first half of the first story of the book, which I actually wrote. I think it was the second last story that I wrote, and I wrote it just before the pandemic started in the winter of 2020. And I'm just going to read the first few pages of it. The story is called The Dance of the Cygnets. Ballet class starts at 8 a.m., so I get up early. In the bathroom while I shower, I can hear my neighbor slam their bathroom door and puke into the toilet. I hear them puking every morning, a deep heave and then a splash. After my shower, I bobby pin my hair into a bun and pull on my tights and leotard, then my clothes. I try to eat breakfast, but it's too early, and listening to the puking has turned my stomach. I drink my coffee quickly, black, throw a hard-boiled egg in my bag. The hallway outside my apartment smells like steamed broccoli, but slightly off, an undertone of rot. The smell starts as soon as you open the apartment door, and it travels throughout the building with a definitive crescendo on the third floor. It becomes faint as you walk from the elevator down the hall to the lobby, but is only fully gone again when you step outside the building. On the commute, I've been listening to an audiobook about trees. Apparently, there's this white stringy fungus in the root systems of forests, and even in more dispersed groups of trees, like in a park or a neighborhood. The fungus connects the forest into one sentient community. It's called a mycorrhizal network. It's underneath us most of the time, filaments that reach out for each other deep underground, a hidden conversation. The fungus is in a symbiotic relationship with the trees. If the forest thrives, the fungus thrives. But it's also somehow part of the forest's brain. When a tree is about to die, it releases all the nutrients stored in its trunk and branches down to its roots, and the network of fungus transmits all that sap to trees that need it. The fungus knows where there's less water in the forest and helps the trees transport the sap to that area, like an egalitarian redistribution of wealth or one unified body. I call my sister Sandy on the walk from the bus to the SkyTrain. I plan it so the call will be short. There's no reception once I get down the escalator. Sandy almost died and is in the hospital, but we don't talk about that. On the phone, she asks about Rita, a dancer in my program I told Sandy about because I'm jealous of her. Everyone at the ballet school is much smaller than me. tiny, beautiful girls from rich families with delicate arched feet and bony legs. They have perfect little bulges of muscle for calves and quads and hamstrings, and their stomachs are concave. Rita is the most perfect of all of them. She's from Seattle and is very elegant, always smells like lavender oil, and basically only eats celery sticks and salads. I don't have anything to say about Rita today. I've already told Sandy how she washes her face with Cetaphil at lunchtime and reads romance novels in her sweatpants as she stretches before class. Rita is first cast for Odette in the production of Swan Lake we're rehearsing for a year-end showcase. I'm second cast as one of the cygnets, the 4 swans who link arms and trot around really fast, twitching their heads in circles, and I have a part in the corps. Everyone loves the dance of the cygnets, but I would way rather do one of Odette's slow solos. We have to learn all the parts in our repertoire class, though, so I'll still get to dance Odette, even if I don't get to do it on stage. My sister is actually my twin, not identical. She hates ballet, and she looks nothing like me. She's into video games, snowboarding, self-harm, and hallucinogens. She fell off the roof of our school in grade 12 when she was high on mushrooms and tore the tip of her thumb off on the way down, caught on a nail. She was otherwise unscathed. She has a line of thin vertical scars around her hips that run beneath the waistline of her pants in a perfectly spaced row, tidy veins of raised white where she carved into herself with a sharp knife. She's a ski bum in Whistler now, or she was until last week. She even calls herself that. She loves hearing about Rita, I think, because she likes it when she knows I feel insecure. Like it reassures her that there are lots of people out there who are better than me, and that she's on the better path in life. She's always been like that, helping me tear myself down so she can rise up. I haven't told her that I'm the only person in our class who can do Odette's double rond de jambe développés and the Odette solo without faltering. That's one of the solos with the 2 rows of swans on either side of Odette while she's doing this amazing adage. Double rond de jambe and développé seconde, arms up, chassé, tendu, arrière. Double rond de jambe and développé seconde, arms up, chassé, tendu, arrière. Double rond de jambe and développé seconde, arms up, and bourrée, 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 piqué turn. I'm at the escalator, I say to Sandy, which cues the end of the conversation. I turn the audiobook back on for the ride on the SkyTrain and keep listening as I walk up Granville Street with my toes pointed out. I'm still thinking about the trees as I do my warm-up in the studio. Leg swings to loosen my hip joints, downward dog to stretch out my spine, ankle rolls to wake up my feet. Squeezing swollen, blistered feet into your point shoes at 7:45 a.m. is one of the most unpleasant sensations I can think of. Each point of contact between raw toe joint and cold, hard canvas prickles an objection. I think about the dying trees dropping all their sap, and then I just think about dying. I think about dying a lot. Not my own death, really, though sometimes that too, and not in a suicidal kind of way, more of a musing on nothingness and the state of being blank. Sometimes I wish I could be blank. My point shoes squeak against the marley flooring as I releve in first and lower down slowly over and over, the rosin on the tips of my shoes leaving smudges of white on the floor. Sandy hasn't told our mom what happened. Mom lives in Norway. That's where she's from. She came to Vancouver when she was 18 for university and to smoke pot, met our dad, and then dropped out when she was pregnant. Sandy says she's had a taste for drugs since birth because Mom and Dad spent that first year together in an acid-fueled stupor. Sandy's joking when she says that, but Mom feels guilty enough that there were never any consequences for Sandy getting high when we were teenagers. It always felt like Mom was just biding her time before she went home, like she was waiting for us to be able to take care of ourselves so she could remove herself from the messed up equation that is our family. Then she met Andreas online, and she was out of here a week after we graduated from high school. Mom paid for our plane tickets to visit her last summer. On the last day of our trip, we ended up at a mausoleum. It was amazing in there, this dark room with a low, heavy door you have to bow through to get in. And at first you can't see anything because there's not much light. But as your eyes adjust, these dark paintings on the walls start to emerge, illuminated by dim spotlights. It's all painted in rusty browns and blacks, dark grays and reds, and the lights are amber, giving everything a warm glow. The ceiling is high and arched. It's just one room, and the paintings go from floor to ceiling to floor again. They're all of bodies bodies having sex and giving birth and dying. As our eyes adjust to the dark, you see more and more bodies, some all knotted together in these mosh pits of suffering, some in ecstatic orgies, and this one woman standing surrounded by hundreds of babies, with one clutched high on her shoulder out of everyone's reach, her head pressed into its little body. Someone had brought their toddler, and you're supposed to be completely quiet in the mausoleum because the acoustics are so intense in there. But the toddler kept making these cooing noises that bounced around the walls like ping pong balls. It was majestic. Sandy and I were awed. It was one of the only times we've loved the same thing. The artist had his ashes placed in an urn above the low door so that as you stoop to exit the mausoleum, you're bowing to him. Sandy and I thought that was hilariously egotistical. I like to imagine what it would look like if all the bodies in those paintings could move and dance, pulsating together in their erotic life cycle. There's no room for that type of movement in Swan Lake, even though it's about all the same stuff, love and sex and death. I love Swan Lake in a different way, for all its rigidity and technique, and I love a white tutu.
Good job. Yeah, I feel like I've kind of read these stories in some sort of form, or some of them over the years, but I reread the whole collection this week and it was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. In that story in particular, I took down a bunch of notes, and I was feeling like the relationship between the protagonist and her sister Sandy was really fleshed out. And there were two lines in particular that I thought were really effective. When she's calls her sister before she goes down, she's like, she loves hearing about Rita, I think, because she thinks she likes it when she knows I feel insecure. And then also when she says, Sandy and I were odd, it was one of the only times we've loved the same thing. I don't know, I was very interested in kind of like this relationship with her sister. And then later on in the story, you talk about Anna Pavlova performing over and over the same solo for her whole life. And it's almost like they're all trapped in this dance together. I don't know if you wanted to speak to the story or any of those ideas.
Yeah. It's funny because I hadn't actually thought about the Anna Pavlova story. Like it's an odd fact because that isn't, even though that's like one of the most famous scenes in Swan Lake, it's actually not part of the ballet. It's a completely separate solo that is often not in the ballet. But I think, the relationship between Sandy and her twin is sort of part of this like whole, the themes running through the story are sort of like life, abandonment, birth, death. And I think that Anna Pavlova dies over and over again in a very similar way that all of the people in Sandy's life sort of abandon her. First, later in the story, we learn that their father died when they were young.
Yeah, there's like a scene at the end of that story, or the line when they're like talking about their dad dying, and they're like, I wonder if he was thinking about us.
Yeah.
And I remember that too. I don't know, writing stories is really interesting. It's always like funny how it shows up on the page, but I feel like there's a lot of through threads in this story that like make it really
And I think
effective.
A lot of them that maybe like as a reader you notice that even I, as I was writing, didn't necessarily connect the sisters' relationship. But I think that theme of death over and over, of abandonment in Sandy's life by her father, then her mother,
totally,
then her sister, is sort of mirrored by Anna Pavlova's, just like this bizarre sort of cycle that she's in as a human.
For sure. Do you, like, when you write, do you usually like think from an idea? Like, would you think about like Swan Lake and be like, okay, I'm gonna start or do you usually think from like an image, or like what's usually your process?
I don't know. I think it's different. I think it's different every time. I think the like really boring answer is that just like doing it every day is the thing that ends up making stories happen. But for this story, I remember it came together very slowly. I had this like note in a notebook for years that was just like a story about Swan Lake, and then I had been listening to this podcast about forests, and then had been on this trip to Norway where I did go to this mausoleum of Emanuel Wieland that is described in that scene. And slowly all these things, I had just had a baby. I was thinking about life and death and, all of these transitions that happen. And slowly over a very long period, this story sort of, all of these ideas, I started to see that they were connected and wondered if I could sort of mash them together and make something from it. And I think it worked, and sometimes it doesn't work.
This is one of the last ones you wrote.
Yeah. So this is the last story in the collection is the last story that I wrote for the book. But this one I wrote just before, I think the winter of 2020.
Yeah, well, you mentioned having a baby. Do you feel like motherhood has kind of changed your writing process, just in terms of, not in terms of like the actual time constraint, but like in terms of your messaging or how you think about it?
I think it, I had a baby in 2018, and I had written several of the stories in this collection prior to that, or early drafts of them prior to that. I started writing some of the stories. Maybe there were about 5 stories that I had written or started writing between 2016 and 2018, and then the rest of the collection was written after I gave birth, in the first year or year and a half of my kid's life. And I think that for 2 reasons, having a kid really changed. It changed my use of time. I think I hadn't really ever understood how precious my time was until I had none. But I think being a parent gave me access to a whole realm of experiences that I hadn't had sort of life experience with before that. And I think we all draw from, when we write fiction, draw from what we know, and it's really hard to write about. I think it's really hard to write about being a mother or being a parent when you've never had. This is not impossible, and people do it all the time, but I think it makes it a lot easier to write from those perspectives once you've experienced it.
Yeah, I know. I find writing about my own life really challenging, and I'm working on a play right now, and I've never done that before, and I feel like playwriting is very personal and specific and political in a way that is really new for me.
Right.
What are you working on right now?
I have been working on some nonfiction. I'm working on an essay at this moment right now.
Cool.
Yeah, it's all about my family and about nuclear arms again.
Classic.
And I've been working on a novel for a while, almost 2 years, but I'm still plugging away at that.
Yeah. How's pandemic brain been for writing for you?
Super challenging. I think obviously, childcare has been a huge and recurring issue over the past 2 years, and that's been a major constraint on my ability to write. And just all my access to normal literary community has been really affected by the pandemic. But then there's these spurts where it's super productive to be isolated and
yeah. I don't know. Something does feel very fragmented. It's weird even talking about us becoming friends and stuff, because I feel like there was just there obviously still is a very thriving literary community in St. John's, but I felt very close up to it in a way that I think is just
not possible at the moment.
Yeah. It's just really wild.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever do you worry about, when your book came out, did you worry about people in your life reading it, or do you ever think about your own life in relation to your fiction and people, I don't know, their critiques?
Yeah, I think a really hard lesson with this book for me was, I obviously draw on my life, it's not a direct reference to my life, but I draw from my experiences. And I think there are a few instances in the book where I feel like I talked about things that were private in a way that I regret. But I think having that experience, I actually recently wrote a story for an anthology that Lisa Moore is putting out, and we went through a process of editing that story and talking about, because it was quite personal, and she was talking about how, you know, that's such a process, learning how to not feel bad about your fiction when it sort of mirrors things that have happened in your real life. And I think that, the first book is always a bit of a hard lesson in that, because you feel regret. But it's pretty limited. I was really careful, and I did, through the editing process, take out a lot of things that I knew I would be uncomfortable knowing that people were reading.
For sure. I mean, I guess, we live in a small community where everyone knows everyone. It's really hard to avoid that.
Yeah, I don't write about St. John's in that. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I try not to. But more about personal relationships or family, I think.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say to someone who's looking to get published or like has a collection of stories? I feel like this is, I don't know, it's a bit of a classic question. But I feel like.
I think, you know, the best advice I received very early on when I started writing with a view to making it a job was to not worry about rejection, and to just keep going regardless, and to take, I think, you know, at the beginning, I think learning how to take criticism kind of stoically is super important. And it becomes easier over time. But I remember the first few rejections I received were so painful. And now it's just like, you see how many rejections you can get. And I feel the same way. I don't know. I wonder where I feel like I black it out now. You know? Just don't think about it.
Can't think about it. Anyway, that's, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for reading from your book. I don't know. It's always nice to see you. I feel like
Same.
COVID is very weird, so it's nice to come together in whatever way we can.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Sparks Literary Festival. We'll see you later.
This program is brought to you by Ignite